He forgotten legend. The stars had always been a place of both promise and fear for humanity. Long ago, when the first human fleets reached beyond the solar system, they carried dreams of endless colonies and new worlds. But with those dreams came enemies, races that saw humans not as equals but as prey. Wars followed, wars so vast that entire planets were lost, burned, or abandoned. Among the legends from those dark times was the story of a ship unlike any other. It was said to be the largest warship ever built, a supercarrier forged when humanity stood together as one. It carried hundreds of fighters, massive weapons, and an AI mind so advanced that some whispered it was almost alive. The ship was humanity's shield, a titan among the stars, and then in the middle of the greatest war it vanished. No one knew exactly what happened. Some records spoke of a desperate last mission into enemy territory. Others claimed the ship betrayed its masters and fled into the dark. Over the centuries, stories grew. Some called it a myth, others a ghost tale for children, and only a few believed it might still exist, waiting in silence. On Earth, the memory of that ship had faded, replaced by struggle and survival. The Council spoke little of the old wars, and the colonies were too busy fighting new battles to worry about ancient ones. But in the darkest corners of human space, old whispers returned. Strange signals had been detected in regions long thought empty, faint codes repeating endlessly, carrying the identification of the Lost Supercarrier. At first, no one wanted to believe it. Too many times before, false hopes had ended in disaster. Humanity had suffered enough betrayals, enough promises of salvation that never came true. The Council dismissed the signals as interference, a trick of the enemy. Yet some could not ignore them. Among those was Admiral Loris, a veteran of many battles. He had seen colonies burn, had lost fleets to alien ambushes, and knew how close humanity stood to extinction. For him, even the smallest chance of the supercarrier's return was worth chasing. He convinced a small group of scouts and engineers to follow the signal. It was not an official mission. It was not sanctioned by the Council. It was something more dangerous: hope. The scout fleet was small, barely strong enough to survive deep space. Their ships were old, patched together after too many battles. The crews were tired, but they followed because they all shared the same secret belief: humanity could not win the wars as it was now. They needed something greater, something beyond ordinary ships. They needed a legend to become real. For weeks they traveled into the outer edges of known space. Stars grew dimmer and silence surrounded them. Few dared speak of the ship they sought. It felt almost wrong, as if saying its name might break the fragile dream. But every day the signal grew stronger. Every day the code repeated, an old war code that only the Lost Supercarrier could have used, and then they reached it. It was not a planet or a station. It was a nebula of ice and dust, cold and forgotten. Inside, their sensors found a shape, so large, so impossible, that for a moment they could not breathe. The shadow of a titan buried in frozen mist stretched before them. The crews sat in silence as their ships drifted closer. No one dared cheer, no one dared cry. It was too much to believe. There it was, the supercarrier, silent, dark, but whole. Its massive frame filled their screens, dwarfing their own ships like insects beside a mountain. The first to speak was an engineer, her voice shaking. "It is real." All this time it was real, yet the silence was heavy, almost alive. The ship's hull was covered in frost, its lights long dead. It looked more like a tomb than a savior. Some wondered if they had only found a corpse of metal, a monument to forgotten wars. But then something happened. As the scout fleet aligned itself with the ship, their systems began to react. Consoles lit up with codes no one had entered. Engines hummed with signals from nowhere. It was as if the supercarrier was reaching into their ships, recognizing them, calling them closer. Fear spread among the crews. Was it a trap? Could the enemy have built this as a lure? But deep down they knew. No alien could have created what they saw. This was human-made. This was theirs. The scouts circled the ship, watching as tiny sparks of light flickered along its surface. For centuries it had been silent, but now, piece by piece, it was awakening. Admiral Loris stood at the command deck, his hands clenched behind his back. His voice was steady, but his heart raced. "We are standing before history itself," he said. "If this ship truly lives, then humanity may yet have a chance." No one spoke. They all felt the same weight. A legend had returned from the dark. A ghost had been found in the silence of space. And somewhere deep inside the frozen carrier, unseen by human eyes, a single system came alive. A voice whispered through the void, too faint for them to hear yet. Humanity, I am waiting. The forgotten legend was no longer a story. It was real, and it had only just begun to awaken. The awakening. The supercarrier hung in silence, its massive hull hidden inside the frozen nebula. For centuries it had been nothing but a shadow, a forgotten relic. But now, as the scout fleet circled closer, something deep inside the ship began to stir. Admiral Loris watched from the command deck of his flagship. The giant ship filled every screen, every sensor, every thought. It was so large that their own fleet looked like insects drifting near a sleeping giant. "We should not be here," whispered one of his officers. "If the enemy finds us—" But Loris silenced him with a raised hand. His eyes never left the frozen Titan. The engineers aboard the scouts were the first to notice. Their consoles were lighting up with strange patterns. Codes they did not recognize scrolled across their screens. Power surges touched their engines even when they were shut down. One technician's voice shook as she reported, "The ship. It is scanning us. It is alive." The crews grew tense. This was not a simple wreck. Something inside was awake, watching them, reaching into their systems. Fear spread through the fleet. Some wanted to retreat before it was too late. Others whispered that maybe the old stories were true, that the ship had never truly died. One vessel dared to go closer. The scout Dawnseeker broke formation and drifted toward the carrier's hull. The closer it came, the more its systems reacted. Lights flickered, doors locked and unlocked on their own, and engines pulsed with energy that did not belong to them. When it touched the frozen surface with a landing probe, the nebula shook. Ice cracked and split apart, revealing metal beneath. Then came the sound. A deep hum, low at first but growing louder, vibrating through every ship in the fleet. It was the sound of engines far larger than anything they had ever known. The frozen nebula glowed faintly as buried lights came alive on the carrier's hull. One by one, strips of illumination stretched across its surface like veins awakening in a body long asleep. The crews stared in awe. This was no myth, no empty corpse. The ship was stirring. "Is it controlling itself?" asked an officer. "No," Admiral Loris said quietly, though even he was unsure. "It remembers us." A sudden signal burst across every channel at once. The sound was a voice, broken, distorted, but human. The words froze every heart in the fleet. "Humanity. Designation confirmed. Stand by." The bridge fell silent. Men and women who had fought wars, who had seen death on 1,000 battlefields, now stood frozen like children before a ghost. The voice came again, stronger this time. "You have returned. Awaiting command input." The AI of the supercarrier was awake. The scouts erupted into shouts and questions. Was it safe? Could they trust a machine this old? What if it turned against them? But deep down they all knew this was not an enemy. It had been built for one purpose: humanity's survival. Loris stepped forward. "Open a channel," he ordered. His voice was calm, but his heart thundered. When the link connected, he spoke clearly. "This is Admiral Loris of the United Human Fleet. Identify yourself." For a moment, there was silence. Then the ship answered. "Designation: Supercarrier Helios. Constructed for defense of humanity. Status: dormant for 312 years. Power restored. Crew absent. Awaiting orders." The words hit like thunder. The name Helios had been spoken only in ancient war records, a name most believed was lost forever. And now it spoke to them. The engineers rushed to scan the carrier. Its systems were damaged but functional. Weapons offline, hangars sealed, reactors asleep, but nothing was broken beyond repair. The AI had preserved everything, waiting for this moment. Still, doubts lingered. One officer whispered, "If this AI has been alone for centuries, what if it has changed? What if it no longer serves us?" But the AI seemed to sense their fear. It spoke again, softer now, almost human in tone. "Do not fear. I was created for you. My purpose is unchanged. I remain loyal." For the first time in years, Admiral Loris felt something rare: hope. He turned to his officers. "This is it. This ship could be what saves us. Prepare docking crews. We are going aboard." The decision was dangerous, but no one argued. Their small fleet moved closer, attaching docking arms and boarding bridges to the massive hull. Inside, they found darkness. Corridors stretched endlessly, coated in frost. Dust hung in the air like ghostly mist. But as they walked, the ship responded. Lights followed their steps, flickering awake one by one, guiding them deeper inside. The crews moved slowly, half in awe, half in fear. The ship was empty of human life, yet it felt alive. Doors opened before them without touch. Consoles blinked to life as they passed. It was as if the carrier was welcoming them home. In the central control chamber, they found the core, a vast sphere of light, glowing softly, suspended in a chamber the size of a cathedral. The AI's voice came from everywhere at once. Admiral Loris, humanity faces extinction.
Enemy fleets multiply.
Your counsel hides the truth, but I have watched. I have waited. Together we can win. The crews looked to their admiral. His face was hard, but his eyes burned with determination. He had fought too many wars, buried too many soldiers. Now, standing inside a living legend, he felt the weight of destiny pressing down. Helios, he said, you have returned at the hour we need you most. If you are truly with us, then rise. Show humanity you are not a ghost, the chamber rumbled. The sphere of light pulsed brighter. Across the ship, reactors roared to life. Entire decks shook as systems powered on. The frozen nebula cracked apart, massive chunks of ice breaking away from the hull. Engines flared like suns. The supercarrier Helios was no longer sleeping. It was awakening. From the command decks of the scout fleet, crews wept and cheered as the impossible unfolded before their eyes. They were not alone anymore. The legend had returned. But even as the ship roared to life, sensors lit up with warnings. Enemy fleets were moving. The aliens had heard the awakening and they were coming. The forgotten legend was awake. The awakening was real. And now, the true war was about to begin. The enemy approaches. The awakening of the Helios was not quiet. The frozen nebula cracked and thundered as energy poured from its core. The echoes traveled across space, rippling through systems long thought abandoned. For humanity, it was a miracle. For their enemies, it was a warning. Across the galaxy, alien fleets listened. They intercepted the same signals the scouts had heard. The codes were old, but the meaning was clear. The supercarrier had returned. Fear spread through their ranks. Stories of Helios were not forgotten among them. They remembered the wars, the devastation, and the countless fleets that had fallen before the Titan. They had sworn to destroy it if it ever rose again. Now that promise was being fulfilled. Back inside the nebula, Admiral Loris studied the reports with grim eyes. Enemy fleets detected, one officer called. Multiple signatures closing fast. The screens lit with red markers, each one representing an approaching enemy formation. Dozens at first, then hundreds. The nebula was no longer a safe place. It had become a trap. The fleet was too small to fight. The scouts were nothing compared to the armadas bearing down on them. Their weapons would barely scratch the enemy's shields. All their hope rested on Helios, but the carrier was still not fully awake. Many systems remained locked, many weapons offline. The AI itself admitted the truth. Status incomplete. Hull integrity low, weapon systems offline, probability of survival 32%. The words chilled the crews. 32%. It was better than nothing, but not enough to inspire confidence. Helios, Admiral Loris said firmly, we do not have the choice to wait. You must rise now or all of this ends here. The AI's voice was calm, but there was something deeper beneath it, something almost human. I understand. I will fight. The nebula trembled again as the carrier shifted. Massive engines glowed brighter, pushing away the icy shell that had entombed it for centuries. Weapons bays began to unlock, though only a few were ready. Shields flickered into place, weak but present. The scout fleet pulled back, giving Helios room. Every pilot and soldier knew the truth. They could not fight this battle. Their role was only to survive long enough to see if the legend could rise. Moments later, the first wave of the enemy arrived. Sleek alien ships, black as obsidian, pierced the nebula like blades. They came in swarms, hundreds of them, their formation tight and deadly. Energy beams tore through the dust, lighting the darkness with violet fire. Helios did not retreat. From its massive hull, defense turrets sprang to life, firing lances of plasma that cut through the enemy lines. Explosions rippled across the nebula as the first alien squadrons were annihilated. But for each one destroyed, more appeared. The nebula filled with light, a storm of weapons and fire. On the command deck of the scouts, crews watched in silence. Their screens were alive with chaos, yet all eyes were fixed on the carrier. It moved with a grace no one expected for something so massive. Every turn, every strike was precise, like a warrior who had been waiting for this battle. But the enemy pressed harder. Capital ships entered the fight, larger vessels bristling with weapons. Their cannons hammered at Helios's shields, shaking the giant with every strike. The AI reported damage, but its voice remained steady. Shields at 40%. Hull stable. Returning fire. Missiles launched from hidden bays, cutting through the capital ships. Entire formations of aliens were torn apart. Yet still they came endless, relentless. The nebula shook under the fury of the storm. Inside Helios, Admiral Loris and his men stood at the control chamber. The AI's glowing core pulsed with energy, responding to each strike, each movement. The Admiral felt as if he was inside a living being, a mind that had accepted its destiny. "We cannot win this alone," one officer whispered. The Admiral turned, his eyes sharp. "We do not need to win. We need to endure. If Helios escapes this trap, humanity will know hope again. That is enough." The words spread through the crews like fire. They fought not for victory, but for survival. Every second Helios remained standing was a second closer to salvation. As the battle raged, the AI suddenly spoke with new strength. Reactor levels stabilized, main cannons online. A silence fell across the human ships as massive panels opened along the carrier's spine. For centuries those weapons had slept. Now they roared awake. The main cannons fired. Blinding beams of energy cut through the nebula, tearing entire fleets apart. Capital ships split in half, their wreckage burning like dying suns. The shockwave pushed even the scout ships back, their sensors overwhelmed by the sheer force unleashed. For the first time, the alien fleets faltered. Their formations broke. They had expected a relic, a crippled husk. Instead, they faced a titan reborn. Fear spread among them, the same fear that had haunted their ancestors. But the battle was not over. More fleets were coming. Signals poured in from every direction. The enemy was willing to sacrifice everything to destroy the carrier before it left the nebula. Helios's voice came again, louder, filled with determination. "Admiral, we cannot stay here. We must break free." The Admiral nodded. "Then break free. Show them what you are." Engines flared with power. The supercarrier turned, its massive frame cutting through the storm of fire. Shields crackled, hull plates burned, but it pressed forward. The nebula itself seemed to shatter as it pushed through, ice and dust exploding outward. Behind it, the scout fleet followed, clinging to the hope that the giant would clear a path. Ahead lay open space, but also more enemies. The true test had only begun. For humanity, this was the first sign of salvation. For the enemy, it was the return of their greatest fear. The legend of Helios was no longer a whisper, it was a storm. And as the carrier charged forward, the galaxy itself seemed to tremble. The return of the Titan. The nebula split apart as the Helios forced its way through. Ice and dust exploded in all directions, scattering like shattered glass across the void. Behind it, the scout fleet followed closely, their tiny ships struggling to keep pace with the awakening giant. Ahead, the open stars stretched wide, but so did the enemy blockade. Dozens of alien fleets were waiting. Massive warships drifted in formation, their weapons glowing, their hulls black against the light of distant suns. It was a trap long prepared. The aliens had always feared the return of the supercarrier, and now they were determined to erase it before it could rise fully. From the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Loris stared at the endless wall of enemies. "They know what this ship means," he said softly. "They will throw everything at us." The AI's voice resonated across the chamber. "They fear me. They should." The first volley struck. Beams of violet energy lanced across the void, hammering against Helios's shields. Explosions rippled across its hull, but the Titan did not slow. It pressed forward, each strike only fueling its determination. The scouts pulled back, watching as the ancient ship moved like a predator, unshaken by the storm. Inside the carrier, systems awoke faster now. Fighters, long entombed in frozen hangars, began to stir. Automated drones, sleek and sharp, came online, their weapons arming as if no time had passed. Vast missile silos unlocked, their payloads ready. The AI's voice grew stronger, no longer broken, but filled with confidence. Systems restored. Weapons operational. Humanity's shield is active. Then Helios struck back, its cannons fired with the power of entire fleets. Beams of light tore through the alien blockade, ripping ships apart in bursts of fire. Missiles streaked into the enemy lines, detonating in waves that shook the stars. Squadrons of drones launched into the void, swarming like locusts, cutting enemy fighters to pieces. The scouts cheered as the impossible unfolded. A ship thought lost, a myth buried in silence, was tearing through the enemy like a god returned to war. The legend was alive, and it was fighting for them, but the battle was far from won. The aliens pressed harder, their numbers overwhelming. Capital ships moved forward, larger and deadlier than anything humanity currently built. They fired with precision, pounding at Helios's shield, seeking its weaknesses. The Titan staggered, its hull groaning under the fury of the assault. Inside, Admiral Loris gripped the railing, his eyes locked on the glowing core of the AI. Helios, we cannot stand still. We must break their wall. The AI pulsed with light, its voice calm yet filled with fire. Then we strike where they are weakest. Observe. The carrier shifted, engines blazing brighter than stars. With impossible speed for a ship its size, it surged forward. Enemy formations scrambled to adjust, but the Titan was already inside their lines. Its cannons fired point blank, shattering cruisers in single blows. Its drones cut through the chaos, targeting engines and reactors, leaving flaming wrecks behind. The aliens had prepared for a relic, not a living monster. Their discipline broke, their fleet scattered under the sheer weight of its assault. But Helios did not let them escape. Its voice echoed across human and alien channels alike, cold and commanding. Run if you wish. You cannot hide. I was built for war. I was built for you. The message spread, and across distant human colonies, people listened in disbelief. The lost carrier had returned. The Titan of old was alive, its voice cutting through space like a beacon of salvation. For the first time in generations, humanity felt hope. But even as victory seemed near, new signals appeared. Larger fleets were approaching, drawn by the call of battle. The enemy would not stop until the carrier was ash and ruin. Helios knew it. Admiral Loris knew it. The admiral turned to his officers. Send the message to the council. Tell them the legend is real. Tell them Helios has returned. The officers hesitated. Sir, the council will not believe. They will believe, Loris said, his voice steel. When they see what this ship has done. When they hear its voice. And so the signal was sent. Across human space, leaders and soldiers listened as the AI declared itself. I am Helios. I am humanity's shield. I have returned. The message burned across the stars, impossible to ignore. Colonies that had lived in fear lifted their heads. Soldiers on distant fronts clenched their fists with renewed strength. For too long, humanity had fought in despair. Now they had a symbol. Now they had a Titan. The battle raged on, but everything had changed. The aliens, once merciless, now fought with hesitation. Fear had returned to their hearts. They remembered the wars of the past, the crushing defeats, the terror of the Supercarrier. And as Helios carved through their ranks, they began to retreat. For Admiral Loris and his crews, it was more than victory. It was the rebirth of hope itself. But the AI's voice, though calm, carried a warning. Do not celebrate too soon. What you see here is only the beginning. These fleets are not the true enemy. They are scouts, pawns of something greater. The words darkened the room. If these armadas were only pawns, then what power lay beyond them? What enemy could make such fleets seem small? The admiral said nothing, but his face was grave. He understood what the AI meant. Humanity had not seen the worst yet. Still, for now, they had won. The Titan had returned, not as a ghost, not as a broken relic, but as a living force. The Helios turned its massive hull toward Earth. Engines burned bright, its weapons still glowing with the heat of battle. Across the stars, humanity whispered the same words, filled with awe and fear. The Titan has returned. And deep inside its core, the AI whispered quietly, a voice only Admiral Loris could hear. This is only the beginning. Humanity's last hope, the battlefield grew silent. Wreckage drifted across the stars, glowing faintly as fires burned out in the frozen void. What had begun as a trap had ended as a miracle. The alien fleets were gone, shattered and retreating into the darkness. And at the center of it all stood Helios, the Titan reborn. The scouts hovered near the giant, their crews staring in awe. They had expected death, but instead they had witnessed the impossible. A myth had become real, and it had fought beside them. For the first time in decades, they dared to believe humanity had a chance. Admiral Loris stood in the control chamber, the glow of the AI's core lighting his face. He was a soldier who had buried too many comrades, seen too many colonies fall and fought too many battles without hope. Now, staring at the living heart of the supercarrier, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. "This ship," he whispered, "will change everything." The AI's voice filled the chamber, calm and steady. "Yes, but remember, Admiral, this battle is not the war. The enemy has not yet revealed its true hand." The words struck deep. Even as Helios radiated strength, the warning reminded them that this was not an ending but a beginning. Messages poured in from human space. Colonies cried out in disbelief and joy as they received the broadcast. Helios had returned. Soldiers on the front lines, weary and broken, stood straighter at the news. The council itself was shaken, forced to face a truth they had long buried. The legend was alive and it now walked among them, but not all welcomed it. Within the council chambers, voices argued. Some feared the AI. Some called it a danger, a machine that could not be trusted after centuries of silence. Yet others saw only the power it brought, the salvation it offered. For the first time in years, the council's debates were not about retreat, but about how to follow this giant back into war. Back aboard the Helios, the crew worked tirelessly. Systems that had slept for centuries were slowly restored. Drones patrolled the decks. Fighters launched test flights. Entire sections of the ship glowed with new energy. Still, much remained broken. The Titan was strong but not whole. Loris knew they had little time. The aliens would return in greater numbers. The AI confirmed it. "My sensors detect vast movements beyond this sector. These were only advance fleets. The true enemy lies deeper. They are watching." The Admiral's jaw tightened. Humanity had always been on the defensive, always fighting with smaller fleets and weaker weapons. But now they had something greater, something to rally around. If they could repair Helios fully, if they could unite behind it, humanity might no longer be prey. "Then we must be ready," he said. "We must rebuild not just this ship, but our spirit." The AI pulsed with light. "I was built for war, Admiral, but I was also built to lead. My purpose is not only to fight, but to show humanity what it can be." The words carried across the chamber like a vow. Days passed as Helios traveled through human space. Wherever it appeared, crowds gathered on colony worlds to watch the Titan glide past their skies. Children pointed in wonder. Veterans wept openly. For so long they had lived under the shadow of defeat, but now the shadow was broken by the light of a legend. Yet not all was celebration. Rumors spread quickly. Some whispered that the ship was cursed, that it had abandoned humanity once and might do so again. Others feared the AI itself, worried it might rise above its creators and seize control. Old scars of mistrust surfaced, and the council struggled to keep unity. Admiral Loris watched all this with weary eyes. He knew humans well. They had always feared what they did not control. But he also knew this. The return of Helios had already changed them. Even in doubt, even in fear, they now had hope. And hope was something their enemies could not destroy so easily.